As we remember the atrocities of the Holocaust, Greta visited the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland, where Jews were systematically executed by Nazi forces. That camp was liberated 78 years ago today, and this report is a reminder that we must continue to fight for humanity and never let these horrors happen again.
We are at the first camp of Auschwitz, where the story began in spring of 1940 when the Germans built the first concentration camp, where they planned to incarcerate mainly Polish intelligentsia, resistance fighters. That was part of the first wave of terror in occupied Poland. And then so the Germans used the old army barracks and they created here the first concentration camp, and the concentration camp developed. At some point, they tried to find a way of killing people faster because of certain developments, because of the plans to deport Soviet prisoners of war here. And the SS tested Cyclone B, a poison to kill people, and it worked, and they decided to create a homicidal gas chamber. And so this is the building you can see over here. This building existed here before the war. It was a storage building for the army base. When the Germans took over, they built there a morgue and they created a crematorium, and you can see the chimney here. And then when this experiment with poisonous gas succeeded, they used the morgue to create the first homicidal gas chamber of Auschwitz, where they could kill groups of people. We are here at the entrance to Auschwitz I. What you can see here in front of us is the entrance to the camp with this very infamous slogan, Arbeit macht frei, work makes one free. Very cynical, lying promise given to people who became prisoners, because no one was released from here because they worked well. This was the lie. And actually, this is also something that tells us something about the concentration camp, the cynicism of the perpetrators, the fact that they are people who build and design and plan and want to make this place better and more efficient and so on. And at the same time, they finish their work and they go back to their families, or they can go have beer with themselves. This is a warning what humanity can do when they hate, when they believe in such ideologies.
What you're about to see are shoes that were taken from the victims. The ones were exterminated, but you can just see, I mean, the horrifying scene. You've got men's shoes, women's shoes, children's shoes, slippers, high heels. I mean, it's just incredible. They just took these shoes from these people. They took everything these people had before they killed them. You know, it wasn't just adults who were murdered here in this extermination camp. It was the children. They'd arrived and they couldn't work because they were kids, so they were exterminated. But before they were exterminated, the SS took everything they had, including, look at these tiny shoes. They give you an idea of how little the kids were that the SS murdered. Look at these. Some of these are baby shoes. And they were murdered, arriving at this camp. Here's where the Jews were exterminated. They were brought in here, and there'd be 700 at a time, and they brought into this area. And I'll show you where the gas was dropped in. There are holes in the ceiling. You can see some of the holes in the ceiling where the gas was dropped in. Here's one hole. There's a hole there. And there are more holes. There are holes that sort of litter the ceiling here. The gas was dropped in, cyanide. People died. And as soon as they were dead, they had other prisoners who were assigned to do it to come in, remove the bodies, and the bodies were then brought into this crematorium area where they were then burned. Now, the women had their heads shaved in this facility after they were murdered, after they were exterminated, because their hair was used by the Germans for such things as insulation on airplanes and other things. But this is where the crematorium, where they burned the bodies. So we had the execution chamber with the gas being dropped from the ceiling, the cyanide. Prisoners, other Jews who were assigned to bring the bodies in here, they were burned. And that's how the SS did it. We're in Auschwitz I. This is where 20,000 prisoners were kept, and I'm in Roll Call Square, where twice a day the prisoners were counted. And if you think this looks bad and stark and terrifying and horrible, we're going to take you to someplace much worse. Now we've come to Birkenau, which is 25 times bigger than Auschwitz I. Here they have 4 gas chambers, 4 crematoriums. And I'm standing on railroad tracks, which is an extension of the railway station, because they would bring the prisoners and Jews in railway cars, bring them right into the camp and unload them. And right here is where they would be sorted, selected, right after they got off the train. Those who looked unhealthy or didn't look like they could work, the camp doctors, like Dr. Mengele, selected them to go directly to the gas chamber and die. And those who were a little bit healthier would stay and be prisoners and work. But about 70 or 80% of the people who came in on these train cars were selected to go directly to the 4 gas chambers and crematorium. I want to give you a sense of how big Birkenau is, but even before I get to that, when you come to a place like this, you get such a different perspective than simply watching it or reading about it. And I'm sitting here in a warm coat, a warm sweater. I have to tell you, it is so difficult to endure this. I'm not complaining, but imagine, those prison uniforms, they didn't have coats. Imagine the conditions they were suffering on. The food was terrible. It was freezing cold. The conditions, just the physical conditions are just absolutely unthinkable about those who are lucky enough to survive. But most people, didn't survive here. You get off a train here and you're Jewish, 70 or 80% went right to their deaths, right to the gas chamber and the crematorium. The other 20% who were selected by Dr. Mengele and his other doctors who were looked at as possibly healthy, well, their lifespan was about 2 or 3 months. That was it. So now let me give you a little bit more of an idea of the physical layout. This is 25 times bigger than Auschwitz I, which is part of the Auschwitz complex. But just take a look at the expanse that this is. And this is just a small part of the acres and acres of land here, which is part of the camp and the extermination area. The camp goes on and on and on. You can see how the camp goes on and on. And there, of course, are the railroad tracks where the trains come in, bringing in the Jews. But you get an idea, just this place is monstrous. It's so huge, and monstrous for other reasons. This is where so many of the Jews were transported into Birkenau. This is obviously a cattle car. This is an example of a cattle car, and they're coming in every single day, and they would stuff about 60, 70, 80 Jews into one of these cattle cars. Then they come out and they would be selected. Some would go directly to the gas chamber and to the crematorium. The ones who were not selected to die immediately would become prisoners, but the lifespan of even those prisoners in the camp, because they'd die of hunger or other things, was about 3 months. We're in an area where a barracks for prisoners, and there are about 400 prisoners for this wooden structure. This was not originally meant to be a barracks, but this is where it used to be with stables for horses, but this is where the prisoners were kept. And in these bunks, there are about 5 to 7 people who had to sleep in the bunks, and it's in one particular area, and there'd be 2 blankets, and so naturally they have to snuggle together to stay warm. On the lowest level out of the 3 levels of this bunk was particularly gruesome because, and not favored because of rats in the building, as well as a lot of these people had digestive problems because the food they were eating, even diarrhea. So it literally could be, quite a mess and unsanitary. But you can see how tough it is. But 400 people would be crammed in this area. Now, these are the prisoners, and they were the ones obviously not self-selected to go right to the gas chamber when they got off the train, but they didn't have a long lifespan either. Most of them only lived about up to 3 months because the conditions were that tough, and you can understand why. This is the latrine. You can see, get a pretty good idea of what it's like. Prisoners got to use it twice a day. No toilet paper, no soap, no anything. So you can imagine what the conditions were like. Behind me here at Birkenau is a crematorium. This is one long crematorium behind me. It had 15 ovens. That's because Auschwitz I was so much smaller than Birkenau. They had expanded their size here at Birkenau. And you'll notice the destruction of this crematorium. And the reason why there was this destruction is that as the Soviet military was approaching or arrived, the guards here wanted to hide the evidence. They wanted to hide the fact that they were killing all these people. So they attempted to destroy the crematorium. And you can see this right behind me. We're here at Birkenau, part of the Auschwitz camp. And I brought a candle from the United States to honor David Chase and Helen Kowinski, both Polish Jews and relatives who were, they were here in World War II. I think David was actually at this particular camp. They luckily got out, came to the United States, and my family married into their family, but they were certainly very important to us. And I just wanted to come here and light a candle for them here on the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And by the way, there are no two better Americans than Helen Kowinski and David Chase. They really appreciated being in the United States after being here during World War II.